And our next reading will be Chourouq Nasri. She is from Morocco. Her first language is Arabic. Her second languages are English and French. And she was published in our Spring 21 edition for her short story Wheat Thief. Chourouq is an associate professor in the Department of English Studies at Mohammed Premier University in Oujda, Morocco. She has authored numerous publications on topics related to literature, media, and visual culture. She has published three short stories, Anna in ID, New Short Fiction from Africa in 2018, Outside Riyadh Dahab, said that right, in Hotel Africa, New Short Fiction from Africa, and A Bus Ride to Ouad Nashef in Tint Journal in 2019. And I believe she'll be performing her piece Wheat Thief from our spring issue now. If you're ready to go, Chourouq.
Thank you so much, Matt, for this beautiful introduction. A few words about Wheat Thief. Wheat Thief is a short story I wrote in a woman's voice. It is set during the year of the famine, which has a central place in the history of Morocco, and which is close in time to the present generation or generations. It tells the story of a woman who was ready to do anything during those desperate times in order to survive. Although Wheat Thief is based upon real events, it tells a fictitious narrative. However, I did use the names of people who really existed. So now I'm going to read probably just the first part of Wheat Thief. I've been waiting for the guard's vigilance to lapse for more than 30 minutes. I was nervous, but not as nervous as someone who's about to commit a crime. I was 24 or 25. I had only one child at that time, Zahra. She was a frail girl with bright, curious eyes. She was probably the only girl in Letamna who could read and write. Your grandfather loved her so much that he made her go to the Kutab to learn the Quran with the boys of the village. He even sold one of his lands to Votho to buy her a dress when she was 4 or 5. Zahra was 10, almost my age when I was married to your grandfather. If it weren't for the famine, she'd be engaged. My other children, all boys, died at a very young age. Mohammed died of typhoid at 2, and Lehsen died of pneumonia at the age of 4. Tayyib was the youngest. He had been born right there in the house your grandfather had built with his own hands in the spring of 1942. A little boy who took a few halting breaths and died. The house was not big then, but it had been expanded gradually as your father and uncles came along. A small courtyard was surrounded by 2 rooms, one for sleeping and the other for the meals and the eventual guests. We also had a storage room where food and water supplies were hidden in a deeply dug mtmora. That was the only way to make sure the French soldiers wouldn't take our food resources. The French were fighting against the Germans and were looting the villages to obtain provisions. Your grandfather had gone to Ain Tmushans to work in the French vineyards and wasn't heard of in several weeks. It was not the first time he went to Algeria. He'd been there for a year when Zahra was born and had come back with 500 doros. That sum was a fortune back then. Many other men in Luar al-Khudran at Letamna also went to Algeria searching for work. It was their last chance to save their families from starvation. Your grandfather promised to come back home with enough money to buy food and clothing. He refused to work for the Nsara. His dislike of them was not random. It was an inherited attitude going back several generations. I did not want your grandfather to leave me and Zahra on our own in such hard times. I was upset, angry, and frightened, but I knew that it took him a lot of guts to walk across uncounted kilometers of unknown territory in hope of improving his situation and that of his family. He told me that doing anything would be better than staying at home like an idle woman, doing nothing and wishing he was on the other side of the country where his friends and neighbors lived. The grass was poor and dry with scant life in it. The fields had fallen barren, the sheep were dying, buckets dropped in the wells came up with mud and finally with nothing. I had to go to Maria, which was 8 kilometers away from Aldouar, to fetch water. Our life depended on crops we planted and on the rain. One after the other, farmers sold their lands for a bag of wheat. Drought was the predominant concern of everyone. However, the Nsar were better equipped. They had tractors and water pumps for irrigation. In fact, they greatly benefited from our misfortune. We hadn't eaten in 3 days. I dug the earth for hours and still no trace of buga or any other plant. When a sprig of grass came up, someone was always standing over it, waiting to nip it off. Well, I was digging for its roots because the land was so barren that it showed no sign of plants or weeds. Buga's roots went deep where water still hid from the sun, but even those had died. Guga was bitter and slippery. You had to swallow it very fast, and it stuck in your throat and made it hard for you to breathe. I was relieved that I didn't have to force Zahra to eat it. I could never forget how she choked the last time she ate Guga bread and understood that it was dangerous for her. So I had to feed her something else. I needed a miracle for that. My first thought was to see Botro and ask him for a job. Everyone at Letamna worked for him. Botro came to Morocco in 1921, the year I was born. He had owned only 1 hectare of land at the beginning, but little by little, he bought more and more land, most of which he converted into profitable vineyards. He produced red wine, which he sold primarily to France. Of course, I had to disguise myself as a man. I had to wear your grandfather's old jaleba, had to wrap my black thin hair in his rusas so nobody could tell I was a woman. Working with hungry farmers and impudent Sarah would be risky for the young woman that I was. But this did not make me decide against the idea of finding a job in one of Botro's vineyard farms. How to look like a man. I thought of smudging ash on my face, but would this be enough? I was not able to sleep through the night. I had to find a way of disfiguring my face. As soon as I heard Adhan al-Fajr, I threw the handbill away and went to the kitchen. I took a knife with a sharp edge, the one I used to behead chickens, and I brutally slashed across my face with it. Yes, that's how I got my scar. The pain was unbearable. I stared dizzyingly at the pool of blood that formed on the floor. I finally sneaked into the room where Zahra was still sleeping and fetched my small silver mirror from the wooden box. I hesitantly examined the ugly wound that was gashing in the middle of my face. I looked like a monster. I remembered that my mother used ash to heal wounds. I spread some over my face, but that did not soothe the pain. I went out of the house shortly after the first bell of the day was rung. Seasonal farm workers had half an hour for breakfast before they returned to work again in one of Botro's farms. They worked 10 hours under the hot sun, and how much were they paid? Almost nothing. It was a warm, sunny spring day, and I felt hot under your grandfather's heavy jaleba. I did not know where Botro's villa was, but I assumed that if I kept walking, I'd succeed in finding it. It was not the first time I went out on my own. I used to go to the forest to get wood for the cooking place, but there wasn't anything to cook anymore except for tea. So I hadn't gone to the forest for a while. I walked for a long time. Still no sign of the villa and the large vineyard surrounding it. I thought I had gotten lost. It was noon or later before I reached Botro's kingly mansion. As I approached the vineyards, I was stunned. It was as if I was crossing over from night into day. The world became all green grass against the bluest sky. I clenched my teeth together in pointless anger as I stared at the lands that used to be ours. My stomach wove itself into a resentful knot when I remembered how we had lost all our land, the land your grandfather had spent so much time on and worked so hard to prepare for crops. All his life, he worked the land, shaped it, and was shaped by it. He derived a strong sense of pride from having his own land. Your grandfather's dream was to have 100 hectares farmland. He had worked very hard in the last 10 years and managed to have a 10-hectare land. That's why he was very sad when he had to sell the last hectare to Vodho. For that Nasrani, the land was simply a commodity to be used, traded, or sold. The guard was there. I was not breathing for a few seconds. That was the first time I had ever been close to a man other than your grandfather. His features were coarse, his face was cold and without cordiality. What do you want? He asked gruffly. Talk to Vodho. I put on what I thought was a man's voice. I was trying to sound like your grandfather. Wildman, Wild Mustafa. That was really my father's name. How old are you? I am 20 and I want a job. Go away. I am robust and sturdy. I can do anything. Look at my hands, they are strong and rough. I persisted desperately. There are already too many workers. We don't need you, he said loudly. I was still pleading for a job when a middle-aged Nasrani chewing an unlighted cigar suddenly appeared. That was Vodho. I had never seen him before. I had just heard of him from your grandfather. Still, I immediately recognized him. He was dressed in a neatly tailored shirt and tight-leg pants. He wore shiny brown shoes and a high-waisted straw hat. My first impression of him was that he wasn't much bigger than Hamdoun, your grandfather. Ya Rabbi, if he's so weak and defenseless, how did he cheat us of our lands? My eyes pleaded, but Vodho gave me a disdainful glance. Dégage! I did not understand what he said, but his big, flat, emotionless voice was enough information for me. A spasm of rage gripped my throat for a moment. I imagined myself knocking Vodho to the ground, punching, slapping, biting, pinching, and kicking him. But the fear of not having anything to eat brought me back to the real world. As I was heading back home, I was trying to remember the last real meal I had. Nothing. The bitterness of Guga erased whatever memory I had of decent human food. I walked for what felt like hours. I was breathless, exhausted, and dizzy with hunger and thirst. I touched my wounded cheek. It was bleeding. All of a sudden, I had a brilliant idea. And that'll be all. Thank you very much.